Hello and welcome. This is David Wick, the current chair of the Education Abroad Knowledge Community, and I have the distinct honor today of speaking for the group of volunteer member leaders in NAFSA who, in addition to their day jobs, have dedicated themselves to contributing back to all of us in education abroad and in international education. This year in review is designed to communicate our focus from 2015, present our accomplishment, and to hear from others. That is all of you who are on the call. We will also discuss our plans for 2016 and gather feedback. And I'm just going to have a little bit of help from NAFSA to advance slides during so that they can keep things moving here with us. We will be looking for some opportunities to engage all of you. So as you can hear and even see now in this agenda, there will be many opportunities to contribute back, and you'll be using your chat function to do that. And that way we'll have the opportunity to hear from as many voices as possible during. Also, please feel free to add comments or questions at any point during the presentation via the chat function. So jumping into it, I'd like to tell you a little bit about who we all are on the team. This organization chart shows you a little bit of the structure, but also some faces, I hope many of which are familiar to you from NAFSA's Education Abroad Knowledge Community. Everyone you see here has a day job working in international education and or education abroad, and also has been either elected or appointed to be a leader in one of our sub-areas. So the top group I'll tell you a little more about in a moment, but that's the chair stream with Amanda Kelso from Duke University, who will be moving into the chair role next year, and past chair Brad Sekulich from University of North Carolina, Charlotte, who's been leading our efforts related to the annual conference actually for 2 years now. He continued in that role to help us with a gap that we have. The group of people in orange are our content liaisons and liaisons to subcommittees and also to the regional teams. And they are supporting most of our content development efforts and other efforts, and also supporting the group in blue, who are the subcommittees in relationship to the annual conference, or the EAKC team. So all of these folks contribute in addition to hundreds of others who, many of whom I'm sure are on the call now, who contribute as committee members, regional leaders, session poster and workshop presenters, also as coaches and in the NAFSA Academy, or as facilitators to open meetings, as writers for publications, be they in print or online, and much more. So it really is quite an impressive field in which we all work that has so many people who contribute in so many ways to make sure that we're all able to do our work effectively and efficiently. The chair stream in the Education Abroad Knowledge Community guides the work. One of the big things that we do, and you'll see our smiling faces in just a moment here, if we go on to the chair stream slide. So the chair oversees the work plan goals and delegates the responsibilities. The chair-elect has this year worked with developing a work plan for next year, which Amanda Kelso will join us to tell you about in a moment on this call. And the past chair really is mainly our representative to the annual conference committee. So all of the EA content that you saw at the Boston annual conference was thanks to Brad Sekulich, who, as I mentioned, was past chair last year and continued on this year to help us with a gap that we had. And so he is working right now assiduously to prepare content for education abroad professionals for the Denver conference that we will have next May. And so with that, what I'd like to do, before I jump into telling you about what we've all accomplished, to invite you all to type in answers to either of these questions. We're going to talk about what our priorities as an EAKC were over the last year. But always when reflecting back, there are our priorities, and sometimes those align with our accomplishments, and sometimes they do not, just as we often see happen for our education abroad students. They set out with some goals and then sometimes come back and say, boy, I went abroad to learn French, and I also learned a lot about myself and my priorities for the future. So inviting all of you to type in the chat window, what were your priorities for 2015, and what were some of your greatest accomplishments? It's nice to see comments coming in. We've got everything from revisioning teams to building new websites. And I see some of our member leaders like Justina Pelosi, who writes about a major accomplishment for education abroad regulatory practice, which is another significant group within NAFSA that supports education abroad content, and they're talking about their workshops and sessions that they gave, nice marketing plan development. Wow, it's pretty incredible to see the work of so many different professionals in this field in all of our very varied roles. Marty Tillman's work on campus, working with campuses and working in the field to build momentum around career engagement and career benefits of education abroad. Great to be reminded of that, and I know he's done some nice recent publishing on that, so we all have new resources in that area. Interested in this new one that's come in about increasing the quality of intercultural competencies in study abroad. The teaching and learning focus on education abroad has been something that we in the KC have been working a lot on, and that I know is a significant portion of next year's annual conference and will figure strongly in the work plan for next year. And I'm going to, as I scroll back and forth, I imagine many of you are doing the same in the chat window, but Tanya's is the last one I saw there about her priority of streamlining advising process and moving to an online application and online appointment request. Actually ties into one of our work groups from this year, was looking at just that type of process, and maybe a nice chance to segue. Feel free to continue to add your priorities and accomplishments in. And share those with all of us. I know it's affirming to me to see that many of us have been working on the same thing, and also exciting to me to see how much we continually do accomplish in this field, and all the ways that we're constantly trying to make study abroad and really all of education abroad and international education more powerful learning opportunities for our students, and also more powerfully integrated at our institutions and in our organizations. So thank you all for sharing, and I look forward to more. Let me share with you a little bit of what we were working on in the Education Abroad Knowledge community over the last year. And I'll start by sharing the tool that we use. And I like to share this because for me as a volunteer member leader, this structure was something that has allowed me to be more focused in my prioritization and planning at work. So we begin each year in the Education Abroad Knowledge community with a work plan that, as you can see, is tied to the strategic plan, the mission, vision, and values of the organization. And then for each of the items in the strategic plan, we set forth specific goals with specific outcomes and also the quarter in which they'll be done, and with specific ownership for those goals. All of those people you saw in the organizational chart had specific goals tied to their role that they were working to accomplish over the course of the year. Now, as powerful a document as it is, and as useful as I've found it in leading the Education Abroad Knowledge community, and also as something that I've modeled into my own work practice, it's a little much to take in. So I thought you'd give you this Venn diagram to see what our guiding priorities were for the year. And here what you'll see is that although we had many different items in the work plan, all of those boiled down to a focus on these three different approaches. And I'll tell you a little more about these in a moment, but what you'll see is we wanted to make sure that the infrastructure, so the tools that we had as volunteer member leaders that allowed us to do our work, that those were strong and that those provided good guidance. In relationship to those, though, we wanted to make sure that everything we did fostered diversity and inclusion. And you'll see that we're defining that not just in terms of how we serve all of the students we serve in our education abroad and international education work, but also how we serve the field and one another. And so we're looking specifically at the work we do to make sure that we bring that diversity and inclusion into all our work. And finally, you'll hear me talk more about supporting all functional roles. This is part of a new initiative in NAFSA to better understand who all of the professionals are in the field and what knowledge and skill or competencies they all need. And I'll talk more about that in a moment. Before I go into each of these, though, I want to share a couple of things that we got done this year that give you an example of what was on the work plan. So, for example, the Work Intern Volunteer Abroad Subcommittee members participated in developing a new half-day core education or CEP workshop within NAFSA called Internships, Research, Service Learning Abroad, which was piloted this November at the Region 5 conference and will continue. Another type of thing that came out of the work plan and the work of these volunteer member leaders was an EPUB, a handbook on financial aid for education abroad, which was revised this year and published, and included updates by many subcommittee members and other supporters, including Mary Alice Allen, Michelle Arellano, Sarah Langston, Aaron Polnasek Boyd, Matthew Sagayaga, and Harrison Wadsworth. So all of these people, this kind of puts some more names below those pictures to show the kinds of things that come together, and maybe also to let you know about some new resources that are available. I know, for example, just now I saw a priority related to building internship programs for one of you, and now you know that there is a new CEP workshop that I expect will be offered for the next conference, the Denver conference, so that'll be a resource available. So talking about what our priorities looked like in terms of action, the first one I mentioned was looking at strengthening infrastructure. This was a really interesting process for the knowledge community, but also one that has come back and informed my day job in some neat ways. So we looked at examining each of the things we need to build as a committee, things like open meetings for annual conferences, collegial conversations, also called live chats, which we offer sometimes many times a month, and I'll talk about more in a moment, and other things. We also looked at how we manage knowledge or information among volunteer member leaders. This can be tricky since each year, as will be visually represented in a moment, each year we have new people on the team, and this means we could end up reinventing the wheel, starting over the next year. So we had to think about how to do that. And we also thought about how to better share model practices so that when we ask volunteer member leaders to contribute back to the field, we're asking them to contribute their ideas, not to figure out how to contribute their ideas. What this ended up looking like for us took a few shapes, and one that I'll talk about is that we built process documents for ourselves that that actually infused the other two goals in our Venn diagram, big priority goals, and allowed us to have a much tighter focus on the work that we're doing in terms of the content and ideas, rather than focusing mostly on how we do our work. So it's been an exciting process. I'd like to tell you about a few of the things that we created and disseminated from that. So by having this more streamlined process and strengthened infrastructure, one of the things we've been able to do is more carefully examine, in collaboration with the Education Abroad staff at NAFSA, all of whom are on the call. So I'll say a little virtual hello to Erin, Lauren, and Caroline, who are the NAFSA staff partners who support all of these volunteer member leaders. Together, one of the things that this infrastructure allowed us to do, though, was to look at all of the content that's developed and shared at each annual conference, be they annual conferences or regional conferences, and to pull some of the strong resources that align with the needs that we're hearing from the field and that we've identified in the work plan, and share those back out. So what you will now find online, I'm going to highlight 5 current resources and one more that's coming soon that have come out of this process of having these new structures. So one is a toolkit called Gaining an Edge with Education Abroad that helps students articulate their international experience for the job search. So that's something that Marty Tillman just highlighted, and that he was part of helping to develop and is now available for practitioners on the NAFSA website. Another is The Power of Choice, which is an introduction to choice architecture and pedagogy for structuring student choice. So this has to do with helping students identify and select the best program for their academic, personal, and professional goals. I see some ties to this to some of the other priorities and accomplishments I saw just now in the chat window. So some of you who've been working on building those online advising and choice-making modules or strengthening your advising process may want to go and look for this Power of Choice document. There's also some new resources on maximizing professional development opportunities. And this has to do with helping us all, when we go to conferences or meetings, make the most of those experiences. We have also published resources on clarifying compliance with the Clery Act. It also includes information on Title IX and VAWA, and how we can do that ever important work in our work in efficient and productive ways that allow us to focus on the real goals of all those things, which is reducing violence and creating a world for ourselves and our students that is healthier and better. In addition to that, social media has been a very important tool for many of us in education abroad, but also one that often presents significant challenges. So we're really excited to have this Power of Social Media guide that gives some ideas about how to use various platforms in education abroad. Recently, just in October, we published a resource from the Boston Annual Conference on U.S. Veterans Affairs Benefits and Education Abroad programs, which came at a perfect time for my campus, where we're building resources for veterans on campus and seeking more ways to integrate and honor them, and also to provide support so that they can make the most of their educational experiences. So fell well for me. I hope it did for many of you. And in light of, well, all year we've been working on this health and safety rubric on crisis response. I expect everyone on the call was reminded of the importance of being able to respond quickly and effectively to crises on November 13th as the news came from Paris. This tool will give all of us a tool that allows us to step back and look at any crisis and think about what kinds of response we might make. So it's not meant to replace a crisis management or health and safety plan, but instead to be a quick way to assess, what things might I need to do about this one? How significant is it for me at this time? So some exciting things that I hope maybe some of you didn't know about and now can have access to, and that it seems may well align with some of the things you've all been working on this year. Our focus on diversity and inclusion as I mentioned, was really meant to push the education abroad knowledge community beyond where it had been, which had been a focus on supporting underrepresented students in the field and pushing to create more access for underrepresented students. And instead, we broadened that out to ask ourselves, how can we look at fostering diversity and inclusion not just in our content and outreach for students, but really throughout the education abroad process for students, getting that inclusion piece in, and also in terms of who we are as volunteer member leaders and the work that we do and who we engage. So you'll see that this year we added a lot of working groups that I'll talk about a little bit, and there are two things within this. With the working groups, one, they allowed us to bring in many more voices into the education abroad knowledge community content development, and also they allowed us to focus on specifically on a couple of the needs that we had already identified around diversity and inclusion. So if we go to the next slide, I'll highlight some of the working groups that we have had working this year. And as I talk about these, I'd invite anyone on the call who hears one of these and is really interested in this work to please feel free to write to me, dwick@scu.edu if you want to get involved, or to write to NAFSA to let them know that this is a working group you want to stay in touch with or maybe even contribute to. But I'll tell you a little more about what these mean. So again, these working groups are small groups brought together for a finite amount of time to examine a project, concern or question, and to produce some results, whether it's guidance for the next work plan or tangible process or procedure documents or things like that. So the first one was looking at collaboration between education abroad professionals and international enrollment professionals on campuses. There's a nice possible synergy since international enrollment management people work with portfolios of their own. They work with recruitment systems and strategies, with marketing. They also often will do credential evaluation, and they may be involved in program design and management when they're asked to maybe build new graduate programs or develop intensive English programs for incoming international students. So we saw many areas of possible overlap. And we brought a group of 4 together who've been finding connections and will be publishing a report very soon that we're excited to see in terms of how it will give us more resources and more ways to collaborate with our colleagues in our organizations and at our institutions. Another working group got together to look at kind of a different angle of education abroad professional faculty collaboration. And what they were looking at is specifically best practices for collaborating with faculty to enhance learning and internationalization in pedagogy and curriculum on our campuses, in our institutions, and with education abroad. But what this allowed us to do was turn our focus a little bit from a common collaboration with faculty, either as marketing and outreach partners or as program developers for faculty-led programs or as syllabus evaluators for syllabi from our partners or things. But instead here it was looking at how do we work with them to make sure that in every class on our campuses the international experiences of education abroad returnees and of international students on campus are integrated into the curriculum and discourse and day-to-day activity. So they're working on some really interesting ideas that they'll be sharing back soon. Health and safety, which as you can see features twice in these list of working groups, continues to be a really important element of our work because, of course, without health and safety, none of the vital learning that we all seek to promote on education abroad can even begin to happen. So both of these working groups were looking at health and safety, but from a different perspective. One was looking at it in terms of our partners abroad and how institutions in the U.S. partner with either their programs abroad or with the programs through their partners that they work on abroad, and looking at how to deal with especially managing crises and reporting in this environment that is becoming more and more compliance-oriented for education abroad professionals. We thought it was important to look at these model practices for dealing with host organizations and overseas institutions on managing crises, reporting, and dealing with other health and safety concerns. The other working group that Health and Safety created was in conjunction with the Work Intern Volunteer Abroad subcommittee, and they were working on developing guidelines for health, safety, and risk management on non-credit programming or on these other experiential programs, Work Intern Volunteer. And you'll notice a new R creeping in as we go through this, and Research Abroad. So we're making WEVA less pronounceable, but adding an important component that we've noticed is often tied in with that. So we'll see if we can all learn to say WEVRA, but that gives us that idea, and we thought that was important for both these groups to look at all of those types of programs as they looked at how we make sure to provide for a healthy and safe environment, maintain our compliance, and all those other things which can be trickier if programs are not in the context of academic credit. So we thought that was an important distinction. You'll also see that two of our working groups were related to diversity and inclusion. This tied into the priority I mentioned prior to this, and also to the new direction that underrepresentation is taking, which I'll talk about a little more in a moment within the NAFSA Education Abroad Knowledge community. So first, one working group is looking at diversity and inclusion in terms of student support before, during, and after education abroad. So this was really a conscious turn away from concerns around access for students and simply marketing to diverse students, and instead to ask ourselves, what must we do to make sure that students in all their intersecting identities can be successful, effective, and productive throughout their education abroad experiences? So they're looking at best practices for integrating student identities into pre-departure programming, for creating difficult dialogue sessions or student affinity groups or other things while students are abroad, and for allowing students opportunities to renegotiate their identities when they come back, and other even logistic questions and concerns that students have throughout the process. So it's an exciting piece. Tied to that, this other diversity and inclusion working group was looking at developing a pipeline for bringing diversity into international education and EA leadership. So that group is working on some activities for the 2016 annual conference in Denver, and has been focusing as a committee on how we make sure to continually bring up and support, mentor, sponsor, become allies to other leaders in the field so that we can help the field become more like our students in terms of, so that our constellations of intersecting identities begin to match our students more, and that we can continue to have the field reflect our values in terms of cross-cultural understanding and intercultural communication. And finally, one of our groups focused on technology, which was a major theme I saw when talking about your priorities and accomplishments. And what that group looked at specifically, a little differently from some of the things we've seen, is learning through virtual technologies. So asking questions about what practices do we have for virtual advising, for virtual teaching, for support before, during, and after, but specifically in terms of support of student learning. And they're assembling a really wonderful list of resources that will be shared and that will guide the KC to build new things. Our final priority that we'll shift to now was related to supporting all functional roles in education abroad. As I mentioned, this year NAFSA published a new resource on competencies, and one of the key elements of that is that competency work had to define different functional roles so that we could identify not just what do we need to know and be able to do in our work, but what is the work that we're doing. So we began to align everything that the knowledge community is producing and that all of these volunteer members are building in terms of whether it's supporting direct service, so work directly with students. So direct service may be advising, leading an orientation session, all of those types of things. Or whether it's for the management and supervision, so the direction of an office, the leadership of a team, the leadership of a program. Also, directors of programs abroad may be in that management supervision functional role in many cases. We also looked at the functional role of strategy and policy, so those who lead strategy and policy. Now, some of us overlap multiples of these on a daily basis, but we need different tools and skills for each of them, so this allows us a language for that. The fourth group is instruction and scholarship. So that's faculty on campus, but also sometimes my role is instruction and scholarship when I'm designing a pre-departure orientation and thinking about the learning outcomes that I'm trying to help my students achieve during that session. So this language allowed us to really focus all of our work in the last year on making sure that we're serving all professionals in all of their functional roles and throughout the development of their careers. To give an example of what this looked like in terms of accomplishments, I'll jump to a list of some of our collegial conversations. So as we looked at all the content we wanted to develop this year, with each collegial conversation, or live chat they're also called, and all of these are archived typed transcripts that you can find online. So if there's any of these topics that you think you want to know more about, it's easy to find within NAFSA's website, and you can learn more. But I wanted to just highlight how these broke down in some ways to really create and guide resources for different students. So we had 5 different visa-related collegial conversations this year. One of them I put under the management and supervision box, and that's because it was a collegial conversation on strategies for education abroad visa advising. So it was really looking at the process and approaches that we might take or build as an office for managing visas overall. And that was guided to those folks who are thinking about resource allocation on their teams and their overall kind of policy or I guess more process around visas. And then we also had 5 different collegial conversations on specific visa types that were really geared towards the advisors or the people who are leading that process and supporting it. There was one overall on Schengen visa advising, and then that led to separate chats for France, UK, Italy, and Spain on the current status of visas. So those were helpful chats, and also were chats that allowed individuals who work specifically with those visas to get their questions answered. Finally, for direct service, there was one chat related to diversity and inclusion called Access for All, Physical Mobility in Education Abroad, that provided some really strong opportunities in that area for learning about that work. At the management for managers and supervisors, another chat I'll highlight was on EA advising and mental health. Again, this was an advising related chat, but I felt like in terms of the content, it really bridged nicely and provided a lot of good guidance for me when I have my management and supervision hat on. So I wanted to highlight it here and mention it as something that could be of use and of interest for others. For those looking at the strategy and policy level, there were 3 really strong collegial conversations that I've gone back to repeatedly. One was looking at moving the EA paradigm from one of mobility to one of supporting comprehensive internationalization. It was a very interesting chat looking at how we structure our strategy. Another on enrollment management in education abroad, so going beyond just what programs we approve, but thinking more strategically about how we guide our programs and our portfolios and all of our systems to foster the kind of learning we want to see happen for our students. And then the final one was on an ever-important topic, data acquisition and analysis, as more and more of us are asked to demonstrate that we have caused meaningful student learning. Many of us are being pushed to need to do more with presenting data, collecting and presenting data. In the area of instruction and scholarship, another knowledge community, teaching and learning and scholarship, had many helpful collegial conversations. One that I thought was interesting to highlight here was an intriguing collegial conversation on using the campus library to support EA. And I saw many connections that could support faculty leaders in developing and running courses abroad, but also in helping students be better scholars if they're doing research abroad and before, during, and after study abroad for learning. So that just highlights a few of the accomplishments from the team, and I hope each of you heard of something that I just mentioned that might be helpful. I also did see that Dan Hart contributed back an idea of a working group focused on the needs of business managers in study abroad, and that's a neat idea and does connect with a lot of what EAKC will be doing for those strategy and policy leaders, and also some of the intersection between the education abroad knowledge community and the international ed leadership knowledge community. And I think between the two of those, Dan, that you'll already actually see a lot in 2016 that's there and room to contribute to more. With that, as our accomplishments from 2015, I'd like to share one last accomplishment, which was significant and tied to, I think, what someone else's priority was, which was restructuring. So this year, we not only needed to recruit some new leaders, and you'll see on the left in this chart, Amanda Kelso, as I said, moving into our chair. I'll be moving into the past chair role and supporting the Los Angeles Annual Conference for 2017. And we're pleased to welcome Margaret Wiedenhoff from Kalamazoo, who I had the pleasure of working with in co-editing the 4th edition of NAFSA's Guide to Education Abroad, and in a few other areas, and now we're welcoming her to the team as our chair-elect. You'll see many familiar faces in our content coordinators, but we are welcoming 2 new content coordinators. One is Sarah Langston, who's coming in as our advocacy and regulatory content coordinator, and Rebecca Pisano, who's coming in as our student learning content coordinator. Gail, Shelley, Chelsea, and Christy are all continuing to lend their expertise to the team as they either have renewed a term or are continuing their term that was in place. We've also welcomed many new subcommittee leaders. So on this next slide, which is very similar, I want to share it though so that you can see who some of the leaders are, and also so that you know who's involved in those areas. So if you do want to reach out, you know who to get in touch with and how to reach out. So this will be the team along with the regional liaisons, of which there's at least one on every NAFSA regional team around the U.S. for education abroad. And in one case now there are 2 education abroad representatives on the regional team, and we're hoping to see more of that as regional teams continue to restructure to support everyone in the field. So the reason this org chart is so different is because of a really tremendous new resource that was launched this year, and that is a resource on international education competencies. So you'll see here on this next slide that those competencies are organized in terms of, if we look at the circle, the center dark blue are cross-cutting competencies. So these are areas of knowledge and skill that all international education professionals need to use regardless of their area of work. So as you can see up on the top right, education abroad, I look at those and I know that I have to do all of those things at some point in my work, just as my colleagues in purple in International Student and Scholar Services need to do enrollment management, comprehensive internationalization. And then within each of those, the competencies also give us specific competencies for each sub-area. And those may be too small to read here, but the competency document is a very nice, very readable PDF that we've not only used to rethink about how the educational knowledge community is structured, but I've also used it in my performance reviews with staff to help to think about what my team needs in terms of professional development, professional training. So it can be a nice tool for that. It is entirely structured also around those functional roles that we talked about earlier. So it really gives a picture of the advocacy competency, for example, and what do I need to know as a direct service professional, as a manager supervisor, or as a strategy and policy person. So it gives really, really productive guidance in different areas that I've been finding really helpful. The other thing that's helpful for you is now as we look at the team in one more way for 2016, what you'll see is that everyone on the team has specific responsibility over specific education abroad competencies. And this means that for all of you on the call today, if you're looking for ideas, answers, or support related to information technology, you would see that that's part of the portfolio for the network leader and communication and information coordinator, Shelley Jesse, and so she's a person you could reach to. Alternately, if you've just developed something really great, a new poster, a new resource, a new tool related to information technology, she would be a person to write to ask how you might disseminate that within NAFSA, whether it's at a conference, whether it's as an online resource, whether it's in a poster fair session workshop to find that out. So you can see under each one of our roles, there are 1 or 2 competencies with a little hyphen and then listed. So Shelley Jesse, under her, she's looking at the communication with stakeholders and information tech. Health and safety now is looking at both student health and safety and risk and crisis management, kind of overlapping both the direct service role, really all 3 roles, and the management supervision and the vision strategy. Our advocacy and regulatory content coordinator looking at advocacy, funding, and financing. And then they're still supporting other subcommittees. But we're hoping this structure will give all of you and all of us more ways to interact and more ways to make sure that we're always creating the content that all professionals in all areas of education abroad need, and that we don't miss anything. That's one of the biggest concerns, is with the breadth and depth of this field and all the things that all of us are asked to know and do, that we'll lose track of something. So with that, I'd like to introduce my colleague on this committee, or on the KC, Amanda Kelso, who's going to tell you a little bit about where we're headed in 2016.
Thank you, David. I don't know if everyone can hear me. I hope so. I'm very excited. We've assembled such an experienced and enthusiastic team of volunteers for 2016 because we have a lot of work to do. Throughout 2016, we as a team and the extended family of NAFSA and basically anyone who's willing to help will be rolling out plans for collegial conversations, working groups, workshops, sessions, publications, resource postings to the NAFSA website, meetings and dialogues around the issues most relevant and crucial to advancing global learning goals. And so we really do have a lot of work ahead of us in 2016. To ensure success in all that we do, we will continue to rely on the expertise and participation of NAFSANs from across the field and around the world. So if you hear about a topic of interest and would like to get involved, please feel free to reach out to me or to any of the 2016 leaders to ask how you can contribute. With regards to the 2016 work plan, the EAKC has 4 guiding principles for our work in the coming year. And with everything that we do, we aim to provide training and resources that meet the needs of NAFSANs in whatever role they may play in the field of education abroad. Now, some of these principles may look very familiar, but let's face it, there are topics of interest to this field that simply are never over and done. And you'll see those represented here. I'm just going to focus a little bit on the principles and what that might mean for the direction that we're taking. I won't go into specific plans that we have ahead because that will unfold as the year develops. And like I said, if you're interested, reach out and we'll put you to work. With regards to balancing quality and quantity in education abroad, this principle is really emerging from the thought that we currently see a great emphasis in the field placed on increasing numbers. But as a field, we want to be mindful not to sacrifice quality for quantity. So we will continue to develop and offer resources around staple EA issues, such as recruitment, pre-departure, reentry, cost and affordability, student development, issues of reciprocity and community engagement. But we're also going to use our assembled expertise and knowledge to offer higher level discussions around the quality of student learning assessment, curricular innovations, and the evolving role of international education in the 21st century. To me, one of the most exciting additions to the annual conference of late has been the senior level track in the mornings. And so for those of you who are in senior level positions, I encourage you to make space on your calendar in Denver to attend those sessions. Also, enhancing the high impact of education abroad. As David alluded to, we feel that education abroad is more multidimensional than ever before, with traditional study abroad increasingly sharing space with service learning, team and individual research experiences, internships, and volunteer work abroad experiences. In 2016, we will be working to ensure that our resources and activities reflect the rising prominence and accompanying needs of all types of high-impact learning experiences. In addition, we will have activities focusing on the integration of career planning and education abroad. Health safety and crisis risk management. Compliance issues dominate the U.S. education abroad these days. We will do our part in 2016 to support the efforts of the Education Abroad regulatory committees and to assist advisors, directors, deans, and vice provosts in understanding the important role of risk mitigation, compliance, and health and safety policies and protocols in creating off-campus learning opportunities for students. And I encourage our overseas members to learn more about what's driving some of these issues with your U.S. partners, because the issues very much dominate our lives these days. In addition to a variety of safety and health-focused workshops and discussions, 2016 is a big year for NAFSA's safety and health-related publications. So you're going to see that many of those publications are undergoing an overhaul and a modernization, and so look forward to seeing those on offer in the months and year to come. And finally, diversity and inclusion. We will continue the good work of David and team. In 2016, we will continue to expand access to education abroad by working to remove obstacles and provide resources, whether the efforts are aimed at recruiting and supporting a more diverse student population, offering more diverse programming and more diverse locations or across disciplines that perhaps don't receive as much attention, or whether you're simply looking to diversify voices among colleagues both at your institution or in your professional activities in the field. We want to continue to provide platforms and space for discussion around these issues for resource development and idea sharing. So I look forward to working with all of you in the coming year and to hearing your ideas about what you'd like to see the EAKC community, EAKC do in the coming months, the resources that you would like to see created, the topics that you think need to be covered. We have many open meetings planned for the Denver conference, and look forward to seeing you there. Thank you.
Thank you, Amanda. I'm going to take it back and invite a little more thinking from all of you. I'm really excited to hear what the Education Broad Knowledge community will be creating in the coming year, and interested to hear what all of you are thinking about. So I'd like to invite another chat, and I've done some of my thinking, so I'll share mine too, since this is a nice chance to reflect on where I hope to go in the year to come and to hear about what all of you are thinking about. I'm just giving you all a little bit of time to share. I'm interested to hear, see how much of what we're all thinking of for 2016 is a continuation of what you all wrote for 2015, and how much might be pushing in new directions. It does feel a little bit like we circle. I see that that Margaret, our chair-elect, is looking at assessment plan and outcomes for graduates, which is great, and a nice thing that does connect so strongly to so much that NAFSA has been doing, but also that other professionals in the field have been doing, many of whom I've already seen online on this call. I know there are lots of movers and shakers in research on outcomes, so exciting that fits so well. Communication to students, Shelley writes about, which is great. We're so fortunate to have Shelley as our network leader, because she looks at that communication within the NAFSA team, but also then for students, and gets to bring that perspective back and forth. I know there'll be a lot of great resources around that in the in the coming year. Compliance is huge. That FCC viewer, however that's coming in, I agree. We've actually started to use the term compliance much more in talking about education abroad work. So it's no longer just the domain of our international student scholar colleagues, but really all of us are working with that so much right now. Really like seeing Chad's well-organized steps of goals. So it's nice to see. And I like seeing some of the connections. I'm seeing a link between what Dan Hart, what you were working on in 2015 and how it's building into working on some deeper layers in 2016. Seeing nice connections with some of the work that's been done within NAFSA EAKC and with other organizations, and that we currently have plans to continue doing. So thank you all for sharing. Please feel free to continue to do so. I know it can take a little time to think through your ideas and also to share them out. One of the ways that I hope we, all us member leaders at NAFSA, will be able to begin to address some of those needs is through the content that will be available and the networking opportunities at the NAFSA annual conference in Denver. So from May 29th to June 3rd, 10,000 or so of us will be in Denver seeking to advance these goals that we have for ourselves for the year, or to find those missing pieces that we need. There are a few things I'd like to highlight. I'll tell you a little about the current status of sessions, talk to you about a focus track for EA leaders, tell you a little bit about open meetings, and give you some ideas about some ways you can contribute. So Brad Sekulich sent me an update from the recent session selections, and what he highlighted was how we'll see the group of sessions that are offered a little bit differently this year from how we may have before. One is that there's this focus on who, so the focus on functional roles will be really clear. You'll see a range of sessions that are clearly directed towards those in direct service, academic instruction, management and supervision, and policy and strategy. So it means that as you look at either the one functional role you have or the many you have, you'll be able to sort out content, whether it's sessions, posters, workshops, open meetings, and see which one aligns with which of those functional roles. The other big thing is throughout this year, they really looked for sessions that all have an impact on teaching and learning. So the final end goal of all education abroad, I think, is student learning and development on specific levels, but as a general thing and this conference really was asking that. So in their evaluation of all session proposals, they were looking for that piece that shows that it will support student learning. And finally, they looked at the big how question. How are these new ideas going to help? And what they sought was replicable models. So we expect to be seeing at the conference sessions where people are saying, not just I did this and it worked, but I did this, here's how I did it, here's how you can do it, so that it will also work for you. So I'm really excited about the approach they took. And one thing about that is that it ties into an initiative that we are on the third year of this year, which is an initiative with a focus track for strategy, education abroad strategy and policy. So every day from Tuesday to Friday through 11:15 is the focus track. I think with most of the activities Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. During that time, sessions, speakers, and open meetings geared towards those who are EA leaders working in strategy and policy will be all put together so that it's possible for those who are in leadership positions to balance all of their meeting and networking needs at the conference with their desire to build their knowledge and skill around their work. So this has certainly allowed me in the last few years to start to get to sessions again and not have my NAFSA conference simply full of meetings. They've also made some changes in the annual conference plan to extend expo hall time on Wednesday and Thursday through 5 p.m., overlapping the plenaries so that there's more consistent meeting time and space. And there's a Thursday midday time with no sessions, which allows a greater flexibility for networking and connections. So really this is one of the things that focus on those different functional roles has allowed NAFSA to build for us so that we can continue to use the conference for all of the things we have to accomplish there, right? Both the networking and the content development. Open meetings have become a really important part of my conference attendance over the last few years and are something that I want to highlight for all of you. This is just 5 of the 15 or so open meetings that will be offered. But what it lets you know is that there's a place where you can go and connect with other professionals who are working on initiatives, developing programs, delivering services, building tools around these topics, and you can share best practices and advance the conversation. The open meetings have a facilitator and a set structure that ensures that the conversation moves forward, but they're really nice for making connections. So I always walk away with a few new business cards and people who I stay in touch with and continue to build on because they are ways that bring together folks. Last year we had over 900 attendees at our open meetings. And so it really was a powerful tool for education abroad professionals to make connections, share best practices, learn about innovations, and make connections. Finally, there is still room to contribute to the annual conference with content. The poster fair deadline is coming up December 14th, and I highlighted here just 5 of the many fairs. There are, I think, 12 or 14 counted earlier, and now I've lost track already. 16, there we go. I have that in my notes. So there are 16 fairs. These are 5 that are particularly relevant to education abroad, but I want to highlight poster fairs as an excellent opportunity to organize and communicate your ideas to peers. So I know I'm working on a couple of proposals because I like the rigor of the poster fairs, and I really like the conversations I get to have. So I'm planning to attend 3 of these fairs for sure, and I may get to more and hope to see some of your work there. So I encourage you all to put a poster fair application in. As a closing, we thought it might be nice to just gather a little bit more from all of you, and this may be a continuation of the last question, but interested in hearing what are you going to need in the coming year? And if you've heard of this and gotten ideas about some things you've built that you want to make sure others know about, is there a skill you want to build through volunteer leadership or an idea you want to share with the field that you're looking for an opportunity to get out there? And this last question is in part designed to help Amanda Kelso know how to approach completing all the work on the work plan and also who is out there who might be available as a resource to help. So with these questions, feel free to chat in now or to reach out separately to connect with me or Amanda about how you might like to be involved or what you're looking for that you think maybe the EAKC has worked on and can assist you with. People may be typing or may be thinking. So as you do that, I will just extend a huge thank you to all of the volunteer member leaders who were on the call today. I know I saw many of you in the chat and many of you helped to develop this content. It's been a great year for me in education abroad, and I hope for all of you. And I'm really excited to see what we create in the future. This session will be posted online so that you can reference it and you'll be able to link to it. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a wonderful day. Bye-bye.